Hello there. How are you? Are you ready for the second half of the year? Can you believe it's half of it's gone? I can't. But anyway, we'll ignore that little detail because I always talk about how quickly time's going. I don't know whether it's going as fast for you as it's going for me, but it's going ridiculously fast for me. But I worry about that because I'm old. But that's beside the point. We'll ignore that detail. Okay. When was the last time you walked into a room and stood there and felt like a complete idiot because you couldn't remember why? I thought it was probably within the last week. I wouldn't worry about that terribly much because pretty much everybody I know has done it at some point in time. Now, if you're going to worry that this is a sign of Alzheimer's or some other dementia, generally no, because if you're worried about why you can't remember it, then you definitely don't have the dementia because the dementias wouldn't realize that they didn't remember, if that makes sense. But anyway, so let me explain something about the reason you walk into that room and have no reason why. And it's related to actually what we were talking about last week about the neurons when I explained that everything's got to go together and connect with each other. It's actually even connected to some of your study habits too, when we take it that far. So we'll see how much I can get done today about that. But the idea is that what happens is you're walking into, let's say you're in the living room and you see something and it's like, oh yeah, I've got to go do whatever, take something out for dinner or some such thing like that. So then you do something. Maybe you pick up a couple of toys, maybe you talk to somebody, whatever. And you turn around and you go into the kitchen. As far as you're concerned, you pretty much were thinking, I've got to go to the kitchen and then immediately go into the kitchen. Usually not. There's usually something in there that you're distracted and going someplace else. It's kind of like you're trying to go straight and instead you sort of like zigzag and then go straight. When you get into the kitchen and then you're sitting there saying or standing there saying, why am I here? You go back into the room you just left, look around, and what happens? You see something. You may not be aware of it, but you see something that reminds you of why you went into the kitchen in the first place. What you were doing is you had to find that specific cue that triggered the idea and to go to the kitchen in the first place. Now, this could be any room in your house. You could be in the kitchen and think, I've got to go do something into the bedroom or the bathroom or the back porch or the backyard or whatever. What it is you're looking for a specific cue. So then when you see that cue, it's like, oh yeah, that's what I need to do. So you've got that cue. At that point, you're probably thinking about that because it's like, okay, that's why I didn't go into the kitchen. And it's going through your head sort of like that. And then you walk into the kitchen and do whatever it is you need to do. The key here is that you need to have that cue. So when we're talking about the neurons last week, and I said that remember when I said that if you're not aware that you've stubbed your toe, you're not going to feel the pain? You've got to have the cue. You've got to have the issue that's making you think about whatever it is that's going on. So somebody could be playing a sports game and have an accident and be dripping blood. If they don't see the blood, they're not going to feel it. It's only later when they see it. So you're having to have those cues to be able to trigger a reaction from that. Now, when we go back into studying, this is the same thing it goes with when you're trying to remember something. If you don't have the cues, if you stay in one place, and this is what I meant a couple of weeks ago when I said study in very different places, because if you stay in one place and you just see a certain set of cues, so if I'm here and I'm looking at a particular picture that happens to be on the wall and I'm studying something, I'll probably have a connection with that particular picture. Later on, if I need that information, I may not be able to pull it up. If I see that picture, I'll remember it. Because in a sense, I made that mental connection as I was going over the information multiple times. And so it was my information, my brain was making a connection with that picture. Okay. So this is many times why, in a sense, cramming doesn't work. Because if you're not doing a lot of different study sessions to set up a lot of different cues, you're not going to remember it later, especially when you're taking the test or being asked questions in a totally different environment and then which you learn that material because the cues aren't there. So if you study in different places, then you're more likely to be able to not rely on the cues and be able to pick up the information. Just because you can pick up the information, your cues become essentially the information. So if you remember, I don't know, the States of the Union, and you do something like a particular alphabet sequence, or maybe you do it geographically or some such thing like that, you establish a cue that helps you. If you're just trying to go through and sitting there in your room and just memorizing it without any particular cues, you're probably not going to be able to remember it anyplace else. To some degree, if you've got children and you ask your children to remember, or your spouse, and they say something, yeah, I'll remember it, and they take it out of that particular context, then they're going to sit there and say, I was supposed to do something, but what was it? Because the context, the cues are not there. Okay? Does this make sense? So when you're, let me use a hopefully maybe perhaps extreme example about studying. If you've done a lot of studying in different places, you can actually go and study at the beach if you've already got the material learned and what you're doing is a review. And if you've already studied in multiple places prior to this, because all you're doing is giving yourself a different context. Now, if you haven't done a lot of studying and if you haven't really learned the material and you're sort of trying to cram a test and go to the beach at the same time, and you don't have any of those neural networks built up, it's not going to help you. Because what you're doing is you're studying whatever it is, your astrophysics, geometry, whatever, and you're watching the seagulls go by or the waves come in. When you go to take the test, you're not going to have any seagulls go by or waves come in, and you're not going to have any cues to remember what you studied. Does that make sense? So hopefully that when you come up with something to try and study, to remember what you're trying to do is make those cues. This is why, if you will, that you can see certain things and suddenly you've got a memory and you're sitting there saying, where'd that come from? And you're looking around trying to figure it out as what it is and why it came from what seemingly out of nowhere. Something in your environment triggered that memory, because it's not just going to come from someplace else. Might have had a couple of little things that sequenced together to trigger that memory, but you had to have those cues to trigger the memory. So that when you're studying or trying to learn anything, whether it be a class, your, as I said, astrophysics or whatever it is that you're taking, or just something else because you're trying to learn a new skill, you need to have those connections, because if you don't have those connections, you're not going to learn it to a degree of mastery. You'll only learn it in those particular set of circumstances because you're not going to remember it anyplace else. I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't, send me a message and ask me to repeat it and I'll go over it again. But I wanted to explain something about, in a sense, forgetting, and that for most cases, it's pretty much normal. So when you can't remember what you're trying to say or trying to remember, which is backwards, but that's beside the point, it's because you don't have the cues. So that you're trying to set up those cues, and that's the key to remembering things and getting mastery on a topic. Okay. So I hope that made sense. I hope you can see the connection with the neuron lesson I gave you last week and what I said a couple of weeks ago about studying in multiple places. So all of this actually ties together, and there is really, really a method to my madness, even though it may not seem so at the time. So if anybody can be helped, please forward this. And if you have any questions or find this interesting or would like to hear more about it, please let me know and tell me, what you think about it. And we will chat with you later. Have a good day. Bye.